Welcome to Divine Narratives, a place where we share the teachings of Jesus Christ, profound wisdom to guide us toward truth, goodness, and beauty, and inspiring stories of faith, compassion, and spiritual awakening. Sparkles here, you will find white heavy checkmark lessons from the Bible to help you live a more meaningful life. White heavy checkmark uplifting stories that ignite kindness and inner strength. White heavy checkmark meditation and reflections to bring peace to your soul. White heavy checkmark Christian philosophy for daily life, guiding you through challenges and helping you find light in the darkness. Lightbulb, we believe that every shared lesson is a candle lighting the path for someone in need. If you find value in our content, please share it to spread goodness and hope to others. Pushpin, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful lesson. Folded hands, let's walk together in love, light, and peace. Backhand index pointing right, Divine Narratives, a journey to seek truth and eternal life. The sun was setting over the Mediterranean, dyeing the sky a brilliant orange red. The waves gently lapped against the shore, carrying the whisper of the ocean. In a small coastal village, Elias stood silently beside his parents' graves, his deep blue eyes shining with a deep sadness. They had passed away during a terrible epidemic, leaving him alone with countless unanswered questions. If God loved people, why did he let them suffer? Why are there good people who are still unhappy? Why are there evil people who are rich and happy? For many years, Elias had been attached to this fishing village. He had believed in God, had thought that if he just prayed and did good, life would reward him with happiness. But now all that faith was shaken. The elders in the village said, "The path of God is narrow, the path of hardship," but Elias did not understand. If following God only meant suffering, then what was the point of following him? He wanted to find answers. The next morning, Elias packed his things, just a small cloth bag containing a few old clothes, some bread, and his father's Bible. He went to the docks where wooden boats were lined up along the harbor, ready to set sail. Samuel, an old fisherman who had been a friend of Elias' father, looked at him with concern. "Where are you going, Elias?" he asked, pulling the heavy net off the boat. "I don't know, sir. I just know that I have to go." "What do you think you'll find out there?" Elias hesitated. "I'm not sure, but I want to understand the path that Jesus spoke of. They say that following him means suffering, but I don't think he came to make people suffer. I want to find the truth." Samuel looked at him for a long time and then sighed softly. God does not want us to suffer, but sometimes he lets us be tested to learn how to love. There are things that can only be understood when we dare to walk. The old man patted Elias on the shoulder, then gave him a piece of bread. "Go, but do not forget that sometimes the answer is not in distant places, but right in your heart." Elias nodded, full of determination. Elias boarded a small boat, along with a few merchants and pilgrims. The boat gradually moved away from the harbor towards the unknown horizon. The sea wind blew strongly, ruffling his hair. Elias closed his eyes, feeling the freedom mixed with fear in his heart. This was the first time he had left his homeland, embarking on an unknown journey. In the distance, two roads opened before him. A wide, easy road leading to rich cities where people lived in luxury but easily lost their way. A narrow, rugged path where those who seek truth walk, full of hardship but also full of hope. Elias knew which path to choose. And so, the journey to find the meaning of suffering and happiness began. The boat glided on the water, leaving behind small waves that spread like streaks of memory. Elias sat at the bow of the boat, his eyes looking at the distant horizon. His heart was filled with excitement but also with anxiety. What was he looking for? Did the answer really exist? The journey lasted for many days. When Elias set foot on the new land, he did not know where to go next. He wandered through the bustling streets, crowded markets, but no one could answer the deep questions in his heart. One night, Elias passed by an old monastery where candles flickered from small windows. An old priest was sitting on the steps, quietly reading a book under the moonlight. He had a long white beard and gentle eyes, as if he had seen through all the ups and downs of life. "Son, you seem to be searching for something," the priest said, his voice deep and warm. Elias stopped, hesitated a moment, then nodded. "Father, I am searching for an answer. They say that following Jesus means taking the narrow path, the path of suffering. But I don't understand why. If God is love, why does he let people suffer?" The old priest smiled, motioning for Elias to sit down next to him. "My name is Raphael. I will tell you a story, and perhaps you will find part of the answer. See you chun vi con meobitroi. Geishua ko mot ngoi chua tren din nui. Kakna suo du ko mot trian thong ky la, mwakai den geo tungkin, holai troi mot kan mio ben kan bonno. Chian nai kio dai sut nu nam. Ai den chua kung they can do and Hong Kong ai thak mak. Nuoi ta chi gi rang de la mot fan kwa gi lu. Moke no mot na su tre den chua vathe du that ky la. On quiet din tim hu nguyen nan. On luklai and hung tai lu siu qua chua va fat hien ra rang vi the he truak chua ko nui mot kan mio. Den geo tung kin no he che nai cap noi que fa lam du den va hung. Vive 6 su tru tri kai du de quiet din troi no lai de kak na su ko the chuyen tom kong gwin. En hung roi thy john troi qua 6 su gia qua doi kan mio du kung chet. En hung thay vi bo di thoi quan I kak na su sao na lai tip tuc tim mot kan mio kok de troi veo wa geo tung kin bi ho tin rang du la mot fan kong the thu qua gi lu. Trian thong du kio dai qua bao the he va kong ai kan no tai sa no bat dao. Father Raphael Quay sang Elias on Mat Sao Tam. Kan hu winia ka chian nai chu? Elias niamai sui gi. Cham yuan noi rang, ko en hung Thursday chung ta lam ma kong hu tai sa? Nu kak na su siu troi mio ma kong beat a waidu tuksu. Violin muc gat dao. Chinsak. Va du kungze ra trong duk tin qua kan nuoi. Ko en hung nuoi tin rang theo chua ji sa la fi chiu ko dao en hung ho kong tuk su hu winia qua loin I. Elias cham chu lang ne. Chua ji sa kong den de kin kan nuoi dao ko. Nai den de q chuak chung ta de dua chung ta den voi han fuck that su. En hung doi kai, kan nuoi lai bam veo en hung trian thong sai lam, nu troi kan mio, ma quain mat ban chat quadik tin. Wai cha la, kan duong hep kong fi la kan duong dao ko, ma la kan duong dung dan, nai tang? Father Raphael mim koi. Chinsak. Kan duong hep kong ko nia la kan duong ko dao, ma la kan duong ko di, vino doi hoi su that, tinu va su hai sin. No kong fi la kan duong de dong en hung no la kan duong dan den han fuck tuk su. Elias lang nuoi. Tu truok den ne on luon gi rang theo chua la chap nan dao ko. En hung bai geo on bat dao hu ra rang dao ko kong fi la muc dike, ma la du ko the zay ra tren han tren tim kim han fuck dike tuk. Dem ham du Elias o lai tu vin. On kong kan kem fe hong mang nu truok nua. Lan dao tien on kam fe min dang tuk, su tien gon han den ka tra loi ma on tim kien. Sang ham sao, truak kai roi di, Father Raphael dat te len vi Elias va noi. Elias kan van kan mot han trin di fia truak. Dung de noi so dao ko kien kan tubo. Heno rang chua ji sa kong bao geo bao chung ta theo nai de chiu ko, mata duok song va song doi dao. Elias cui dao kam on, roi tip tuc buk di. Kan duong truok mat van kan dai, en hung lan nai, on beat rang min dang di dung hung. Sao kai roi koi tu vin qua Father Raphael, Elias tip tuc kuok han trin. En hung loi qua 6 lin muc gia van vang vong trong tom tryon. Kan duong hep kong ko nia la kan duong dao ko, ma la kan duong qua su that, tinu va hai sin. On de hu rang kong fi chua ji sim yuan kan nui ko dao, ma chin kan nui thuang tu tau ra dao ko cho min. Nu en hung na su siu my troi kan mio ma kong hu ly du. En hung. Kan duong hep tuk su trong nu the now? Lam sa da nan ra dao la kan duong dung dan? Elias d bo sut nu gay cho den kai on den mot ton fo lan. En hung kan duong lat de non nip voi en hung don thuang nan en hung nuoi ban hung rong rauta loim wugoi va en hung kahan kat xin en ben ve duong. Lan dao tien Elias nin thay su tuong fan ro ret qua kuok doi, ka jiao sang trong en hung bo al lua la, kan geo doi run ray trong man, ao rach. He walked along the market where stalls displayed all kinds of goods from fruit to cloth to gold and silver. A group of people stood around a young merchant admiring his wealth. I made a fortune in just 3 years. If I just invest it right, the money will come naturally. The merchant said proudly. Elias stopped, listening curiously. A poor man beside Elias muttered. He makes money by cheating others. He gets rich by the misery of the weak. Elias frowned. Was this the broad road that Jesus had spoken of? An easy but tempting road? He continued walking, troubled. Leaving the market, Elias saw a young woman sitting by the roadside, holding a newborn baby. She looked haggard, but her eyes were full of love as she looked at her child. Elias hesitated for a moment, then walked over. Do you need any help? The woman smiled weakly. Thank you. I don't need anything. I'm just resting for a while before continuing. Where are you going? Elias asked. She sighed. I don't have a home. My husband died in the war and I have to raise my child alone. The road ahead is difficult, but I will not give up. Elias looked at the baby sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. Maybe you are miserable? The woman shook her head. No, I am not miserable. I may be in pain, but I am not miserable, because I know what I am living for. Elias was stunned. The woman continued, her voice soft but firm. When I gave birth, I was in so much pain that I thought I could not bear it. But I never felt miserable because I knew this child was a part of me, a gift from God to me. That pain was not a misfortune, but a meaning. Elias fell silent. He suddenly realized that pain is not always suffering. A person can be in pain but still feel happy if they know they are on the right path. Do you regret it? He asked. The woman smiled. No, because I know I am on the path of love. Elias bowed his head to say goodbye, his heart full of thoughts. That evening, Elias went to a small inn. The innkeeper was a middle-aged man named Marcus with a haggard face but friendly eyes. As they sat by the fire, Marcus asked, Are you a pilgrim? Not really. I'm looking for a path. Marcus smiled. Which path? Elias was silent for a moment and then said, Jesus spoke of the narrow road and the broad road. I want to understand what that means. Marcus pondered. Have you ever stood at a fork in the road? Elias nodded. When standing at a fork in the road, people often choose the easiest path because it has fewer obstacles and fewer challenges. But sometimes the difficult path is the right path. He pointed out the window where two roads stretched out under the moonlight. The road on the left leads to a prosperous town where there is good wine and all-night parties. Those who take it will have an easy life, but they will quickly lose their way and forget what is really important. What about the road on the right? Elias asked. The road on the right leads up the mountain. It is rough and difficult to walk, but when you reach the top, you will see the whole world at your feet. Marcus looked at Elias and said, Jesus did not tell us to take the narrow road to suffer. He told us to take the narrow road because it is the only road that leads to truth and life. Elias suddenly remembered the young mother, remembered Father Raphael, and remembered the poor man in the market. He knew which road he had to choose. The next morning, when the sun rose, Elias stood before two roads. On the left, the wide road led to the prosperous city, full of temptations. To the right, the narrow and steep path led up the mountain, difficult but hopeful. Elias took a deep breath. Then he chose the narrow path. Elias walked down the narrow path, leaving behind the bustling city with its temptations of ease. The path ahead was rough, rocky, and steep. There were no human footprints on this path, only the sound of the wind whistling through the dry trees and his solitary footsteps. The sun was high, the heat burning the air. Elias felt thirsty, but he had no water. Each step became heavier, but he continued. He had chosen this path, and he would not turn back. After a few hours, Elias saw a large tree growing beside the path. Under the tree sat a man who looked like a monk. He was dressed in a gray robe, his silver hair blowing in the wind. When he saw Elias, he smiled and gestured for him to come closer. Hello, traveler. Where are you going that you have chosen this difficult path? Elias gasped, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Father, I seek the path that Jesus spoke of. It is said that it is a narrow path, a difficult path, but the right path. The monk nodded, his sharp eyes seeming to see into Elias's soul. Do you understand the meaning of this path? Elias hesitated. I think that the narrow path is not the path of suffering, but the path of truth. But I still don't fully understand. The monk smiled. Then continue on. But before you go, let me tell you a story. The story of the pilgrimages. Once upon a time, there were 3 pilgrims who wanted to reach a temple on a mountaintop that was said to contain eternal wisdom. The first chose the broad and easy path because he did not want to suffer. He walked quickly without encountering any obstacles, but when he arrived, he discovered that the temple was an illusion. The easy path only led him to emptiness. The second chose a more difficult path, but halfway there, he saw a beautiful garden with fragrant flowers and strange grasses. Tired, he stopped and decided to stay there forever. He never reached his destination. The third chose the narrow path, full of rocks and thorns. Every step was challenging, but he did not give up. When he reached the top, he saw the real temple and received the wisdom he sought. Underscore 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 underscore. underscore 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 underscore. Elias was speechless. What you mean is, the right path is not always easy. And there are those who give up halfway. The monk nodded. That's right. Many people choose the easy path, but it leads nowhere. There are also those who start on the narrow path, but halfway they are tempted to stop. Only those who persevere to the end find the true meaning of the journey. Elias bowed his head and thought, then what must I do to not give up? The monk looked at him, his eyes solemn. You must remember that the important thing is not the path, but your heart. If you keep your faith, nothing can make you lose your way. Elias felt a new strength rising in his heart. He bowed his head to thank the monk, then continued walking. As the sun began to set, Elias felt his throat dry. He had walked all day without water. His stomach was also growling with hunger. Ahead, Elias saw a small stream flowing through the rocks. The water was clear, reflecting the brilliant sunset. Elias happily rushed forward, knelt down, and scooped the water up to his mouth. But as soon as the water touched his lips, Elias felt something was wrong. The water tasted strange. It was not as pure as he had expected. A man appeared from behind the rocks. He was a dignified man, wearing a red cloak and carrying a leather water bag. Boy, the water here is not drinkable, but I have pure water in this bag. If you want, I can give you some. Elias looked at the water bag and swallowed. What do you want in return? The man laughed. Just one simple thing. Leave this narrow path. Follow me and I will lead you to a place with plenty of food and water. Elias suddenly remembered Father Raphael's story about the tide cat and the monk's story about the pilgrims who gave up halfway. He stepped back, took a deep breath, and said, "No, thank you. I will find my own water." The man shrugged and disappeared into the darkness. Elias returned to the spring, finding another place where the water flowed from above. He scooped the water into his hands, and this time the water was sweet and cool. As he continued his journey, Elias realized one thing. On the narrow path, there were always temptations that tested people's patience and faith. He looked up at the starry sky and whispered, "Lord, help me not to get lost. Help me have the courage to continue on." The road ahead was still long, but Elias was ready for the next challenges. After the first challenge, Elias continued his journey on the narrow path. It was late at night. The space was so quiet that he could hear the wind blowing through the dry trees. He felt a strange serenity after overcoming his thirst and refusing the stranger's invitation. But he knew that the road ahead would not be easier. After walking a distance, Elias saw a flickering light in the distance, a small fire in the middle of the forest. A man sat by the fire, covered from head to toe in a black cloak, his face hidden in the darkness. "Hello, traveler?" His voice was low and mysterious. Elias hesitated. Should he stop? But his legs were tired and the firelight looked too inviting in the cold night. He walked over and sat down opposite the man. "Who are you?" Elias asked. The man chuckled. "I am just a traveler like you, but I have traveled much further." Elias looked straight at him. "Further? Have you found what you were looking for?" The man was silent for a moment, then said slowly, "What are you looking for, young man?" "The narrow way, the way Jesus spoke of." The man laughed, his laughter echoing in the night. "So what do you think the narrow way is?" Elias hesitated. "It is the path of truth. It is the path to God." The man shook his head. "Do you really believe that you must suffer to reach God?" Elias frowned. "No. This path is difficult, but it is not the path of suffering. It is the path of sacrifice and love." The man smiled faintly. "But why choose this path? You can turn back. You can live an easy life without having to face hardship. God did not ask you to suffer." Elias felt something was wrong. This man was testing him. He suddenly remembered the story of Jesus in the desert where he was tempted by Satan. Elias took a deep breath, then looked straight at the man. "I did not choose this path to suffer. I chose it because I wanted to find the truth. I know the easy path is an illusion, it leads nowhere." The man looked at Elias thoughtfully for a long time. Then he smiled. "You are smart, young man. But remember, the test is not over yet." With that, the man stood up, walked into the darkness, and disappeared. The fire in front of Elias also went out, leaving him sitting alone in the deep night. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. He knew this was no ordinary man. Perhaps this was the test of darkness, the final temptation and invitation to return to the easy path, to live a normal life without struggle, without searching. But Elias knew that such a life would never bring true meaning. He looked up at the starry sky and whispered, "Lord, help me to keep my faith. Even if darkness surrounds me, I will not turn back." And then he stood up and continued walking forward. The narrow road was still long, but Elias was ready. Elias continued walking in the dark, his heart still heavy after his encounter with the man in the dark. He had overcome the first temptation, but he knew the test was not over yet. When dawn broke, Elias saw an unexpected sight. A large city appeared before him. The high walls, the red roofs glowing in the sun, and the clean cobblestone streets. Elias hesitated. Should he go in? He had chosen the narrow road, but if he passed through the city, would he get lost? But then he remembered the words of Father Raphael. It is not the road that matters, but your heart. If you keep your faith, nothing can lead you astray. So Elias decided to enter the city. The city was called Lemuria. It was filled with wealth and prosperity. On the streets, merchants in silk robes walked, the rich rode in luxurious carriages, and the tall buildings shone with gold. Elias felt different immediately. He was just a traveler in a rough cloth robe, his feet covered in dust, his face tanned by the sun. The people of the city looked at him curiously, but no one said anything. Elias entered a small inn and asked the innkeeper, a fat man named Marcus. "Sir, I am just a traveler. I am on a journey to find the narrow road. Can you tell me about this city?" Marcus laughed out loud. "The narrow road? Nobody cares about such things here, young man." "Why?" Elias asked. Marcus put a glass of wine on the table and said, "Because in Lemuria, we believe that happiness is enjoying life, not seeking anything. We don't need to suffer to achieve anything. We have good wine, rich food, and festivals that last all year long. Why bother with your narrow path?" Elias was silent. He suddenly remembered the story of the 3 pilgrims told by the monk. The first chose the easy path and got nowhere. The second stopped halfway because of the temptation of a beautiful garden. The third persevered to the end and found wisdom. Lemuria, is it a beautiful garden in the middle of the journey? That evening, Elias walked around the city. He saw the streets lit up with lights, the music coming from the taverns, the dancers singing and laughing happily. But there was one thing that caught Elias's attention. Although this place was rich, the eyes of the people here were empty. They smiled, but the smile did not reach their eyes. They drank wine, but it seemed they could never have enough. Elias went to a large square, where a middle-aged man sat on a stone bench. He was wearing a splendid robe, but his face was deeply sad. Elias sat down next to him and asked, "Sir, you seem unhappy?" The man sighed. "My name is Lucius. I am one of the richest men in this city. But," he paused, his eyes looking far away, "but I am not happy." Elias was surprised. "Why? You have everything." Lucius smiled faintly. "That is the problem. I have everything, but I have nothing." Elias listened silently. "All my life I have been chasing money, power, lavish parties. But now, when I look back, I realize that all those things were just illusions. They did not bring true happiness." Elias looked at Lucius and remembered the story of the young mother he had met on the road. Maria had suffered in childbirth, but she did not suffer. Lucius had all the wealth, but he felt empty and unhappy. Elias realized an important thing. Lightbulb happiness does not come from ease or material things. Happiness comes from the meaning we find in life. Lucius turned to Elias. "Who are you?" "I am a traveler, looking for the narrow path." Lucius smiled sadly. "I hope you find it. Don't make the same mistake I did." The next morning, Elias left the city. He stood on a hill, looking down on Lemuria one last time. The city was magnificent, but he knew that if he stayed, he would forget why he had started his journey. He tightened his cloak, took a deep breath, and continued on. The narrow road was still ahead, but now Elias understood one more thing. Backhand index pointing right, not all who have wealth are happy, and not all who suffer are unhappy. Elias continued on his journey, away from Lemuria, the city of the lost. He felt relieved that he had not succumbed to the temptations of ease, but he knew that the trials were not over. The narrow road became rough and desolate. The trees were dry, the ground cracked, and the wind carried dust that covered Elias' cloak. He walked for 2 days without meeting a single person. On the 3rd day, as the sun was about to set, Elias saw an old stone fortress on a hill. High walls surrounded it, and behind the rusted iron bars, there were figures moving. It was a prison. Elias hesitated. Why was there a prison in the middle of nowhere? He walked closer and saw a guard standing by the gate. "Who are you?" the guard asked, his hand on the hilt of his sword. "I am just a traveler on a journey to find the narrow path," Elias replied. The guard nodded, then pointed inside. "Then you should talk to the oldest prisoner here. He has been here for decades, and perhaps he has the answer you are looking for." Elias was curious. What could a prisoner teach him about the narrow path? Elias was led through dark corridors where prisoners sat against the walls, their eyes vacant. Finally, he came to a small cell where an old man sat on the stone floor, his hands chained. The man turned and Elias saw eyes shining in the darkness. "Who are you?" "I am Elias, a traveler looking for the narrow path." The guard said I should see you. The man smiled. "My name is Simon. I have been here for more than 30 years. And the narrow path you are looking for, I have been walking it all my life." Elias was stunned. "But you are a prisoner. How can you walk the narrow path if you are imprisoned?" Simon laughed loudly. "Do you think that a free man means one who can walk at will? Do you know that there are people who travel all over the world, but their souls are bound?" Elias was silent. He remembered the people of Lemuria. They had everything, but their souls were empty. "But why are you imprisoned here?" Elias asked. Simon's eyes became serious. "Because I chose to follow Jesus." Simon took a deep breath, then told his story. "Once upon a time, I was a rich merchant. I had money, power, and everything a man could dream of. But then I met a man, a disciple of Jesus. He told me about a kingdom that was not of this world, where there were no tears, no injustice, no rich people exploiting the poor. He said that Jesus had come to bring true freedom. At first, I laughed at him, but the more I listened, the more my soul awakened. I began to realize that I was not truly free. I was bound by ambition, by money, by the fear of losing everything. And so I decided to give up my old life and follow the path of Christ." Elias listened attentively. "So, what happened?" Simon smiled sadly. "The government doesn't like that. They don't want people like me preaching about another kingdom. They want their power unchallenged. So they arrested me, locked me up here." Elias frowned. "But that's unfair. You only spoke the truth. Why did they punish you?" Simon nodded. "Do you think the narrow path will not have challenges? Do you think the truth will always be welcomed?" "No, young man. The truth is often hated. Justice is often trampled. But I do not regret it." "Do you not regret it?" Simon looked at Elias, his eyes shining. "No, because I may be bound in body, but my soul is freer than ever." Elias fell silent. He had thought freedom was being able to move, to do what he wanted. But now he realized that there were people who were physically imprisoned, but their souls were completely free, and there were people living out there who, though not chained, were slaves to themselves. Simon put his hand on Elias' shoulder. "The narrow path is not just a path. It is a choice. Once you choose it, you will find that the world will not accept you easily. But if you persevere, you will understand that it is the only path to true life." Elias bowed his head in thought. He remembered Maria, the young mother who suffered in childbirth but did not suffer. He remembered Lucius, the rich man who was unhappy because he could not find meaning in life. And now he met Simon, a prisoner but the freest man he had ever known. Elias looked into Simon's shining eyes and understood that he too wanted that freedom. He clenched his fists. "Thank you, Simon. I will not forget this lesson." Simon smiled. "Go on, Elias. You have a long journey ahead of you." Elias left the fortress as the sun was setting. He looked back one last time, then took a deep breath. He was no longer afraid. He knew that there was only one path to life, and he chose it. With determination, Elias continued walking, moving closer to the truth he sought. Elias left the fortress as the sun slowly set behind the mountains. He felt relieved but also thoughtful after meeting Simon, the prisoner who helped him understand that freedom does not come from being free of physical restraints, but from having his soul free from the slavery of ambition, fear, or lust. Elias now knew that the narrow path was not only the path of sacrifice, but also the path of awakening. He walked, continuing his journey. As the sky turned a deep purple, Elias saw a figure sitting in the distance by the roadside. It was an old man dressed in rags, with disheveled hair and dull eyes. Beside him was an old wooden bowl, in which there were only a few cheap coins. Elias hesitated. He had just left a rich but lost city, met a prisoner who was imprisoned but free, and now he met a beggar. Was this another test on the narrow road? The old man looked up, his voice hoarse. "Young man, do you have anything to give me to eat?" Elias checked his pockets. He had only a piece of dry bread and some water. If he gave this to the old man, he would have nothing to eat the next day. He hesitated, but then he remembered the words of Jesus. "He who has 2 shirts must share with him who has none, and he who has food must do the same." Luke 3 verse 11. Elias did not hesitate any longer. He knelt down, broke the piece of bread in 2, and gave half to the old man. The old man slowly took it, then looked at Elias with a strange look. "Aren't you afraid? If you give me this, you'll be hungry." Elias smiled. "I believe that God will always provide enough for those who put their trust in him." The old man nodded. "Do you really believe that?" "Yes," Elias replied without hesitation. The old man laughed loudly. Then suddenly, he stood up straight, his eyes shining, his voice no longer trembling. "Very good, Elias. You have passed this test." Elias was startled. You know my name?" The old man nodded. "I know more than you think. I have been watching you since you left Lemuria. Do you know why you met me?" Elias was still surprised. Because I need to learn to give?" The old man shook his head. "No, because you need to learn to trust." Elias frowned. "Trust?" The old man smiled. "You have learned that wealth does not bring happiness. You have learned that freedom is not in the body, but in the soul. But you have not yet learned to truly trust that God will take care of you." Elias was silent. That's right. He was ready to sacrifice, ready to give up, but he was still a little afraid of tomorrow. Would this narrow road take him where he needed to go? Would God really take care of him? The old man looked at Elias for a long time, then said softly, "When Jesus told people not to worry about tomorrow, it was not because tomorrow was not important, but because if people were always afraid of tomorrow, they would never be able to fully live today." Elias took a deep breath. Now he understood. You don't have to worry. If you follow the narrow path with all your heart, you will always have enough. The old man patted Elias on the shoulder. "Now go on, young man. You have much to learn." With that, the old man turned and walked into the darkness. Elias looked after him, but in a blink of an eye, he disappeared. Elias stood there for a long time, filled with emotion. Who was that beggar? An angel? A teacher? A test from God? He didn't know, but he knew one thing: he would no longer worry about tomorrow. He tightened his cloak, took a deep breath, and continued walking. Now, the narrow path was no longer scary, because he believed. After meeting the mysterious beggar, Elias continued his journey with a more confident heart than ever. He no longer worried about tomorrow, no longer afraid of the challenges ahead. But the narrow path was never easy. 3 days later, Elias entered a barren desert. The sun was scorching hot. The wind carrying sand and dust blew hard into his face. Under his feet were only rocks and sand. Not a tree, not a drop of water. His water bottle was empty. There was no food left either. He felt thirst rising in his throat, his legs gradually becoming heavy. But Elias continued walking. He had chosen this path, he would not turn back. As the afternoon fell, the sky gradually changed from clear blue to a brilliant orange-red. But Elias realized that something was wrong. On the horizon, a giant wall of sand was rising, rolling like a giant wild beast about to swallow the entire desert. A sandstorm was coming. Elias took a deep breath, trying to calm down. He had heard from the merchants about the sandstorms. They could bury everything in their path, sweep away even the strongest caravans. He looked around. There was nowhere to hide. There was only one choice: keep going. The storm came faster than Elias had expected. In a matter of minutes, the sky was covered in dust and sand, the wind howling like a demon. Elias crouched down, pulling his cloak over his face, trying to keep his balance in the raging wind. The sand whipped at his skin, stinging like whiplashes. Everything blurred. He could no longer see the road. He was lost in the darkness of the storm. And then, amid the howling wind, Elias heard a voice. It was not human. It was deep, as if coming from within his own mind. Why do you continue? Can't you see that this path only brings suffering? Elias shuddered. This voice was like the voice of the mysterious man by the fire. He closed his eyes, trying to concentrate. What are you looking for? What do you think you'll find at the end of this narrow path? Elias gritted his teeth. Truth, meaning, God. The voice chuckled. And what if it's all just an illusion? What if there's nothing at the end of this path? You've given up everything. Family, safety, food, water to chase a dream. Are you sure you're not a fool? Elias shook his head. No, I believe God has a plan for me. Do you believe? You're dying in this desert. If God really loves you, why doesn't he save you now? You don't have to worry. If you follow the narrow path with all your heart, you will always have enough. The old man patted Elias on the shoulder. Now go on, young man. You have much to learn. With that, the old man turned and walked into the darkness. Elias looked after him, but in a blink of an eye, he disappeared. Elias stood there for a long time, filled with emotion. Who was that beggar? An angel? A teacher? A test from God? He didn't know. But he knew one thing: he would no longer worry about tomorrow. He tightened his cloak, took a deep breath, and continued walking. Now, the narrow path was no longer scary, because he believed. After meeting the mysterious beggar, Elias continued his journey with a more confident heart than ever. He no longer worried about tomorrow, no longer afraid of the challenges ahead. But the narrow path was never easy. 3 days later, Elias entered a barren desert. The sun was scorching hot, the wind carrying sand and dust blew hard into his face. Under his feet were only rocks and sand, not a tree, not a drop of water. His water bottle was empty. There was no food left either. He felt thirst rising in his throat, his legs gradually becoming heavy. But Elias continued walking. He had chosen this path, he would not turn back. As the afternoon fell, the sky gradually changed from clear blue to a brilliant orange-red. But Elias realized that something was wrong. On the horizon, a giant wall of sand was rising, rolling like a giant wild beast about to swallow the entire desert. A sandstorm was coming. Elias took a deep breath, trying to calm down. He had heard from the merchants about the sandstorms. They could bury everything in their path, sweep away even the strongest caravans. He looked around. There was nowhere to hide. There was only one choice: keep going. The storm came faster than Elias had expected. In a matter of minutes, the sky was covered in dust and sand, the wind howling like a demon. Elias crouched down, pulling his cloak over his face, trying to keep his balance in the raging wind. The sand whipped at his skin, stinging like whiplashes. Everything blurred. He could no longer see the road. He was lost in the darkness of the storm. And then, amid the howling wind, Elias heard a voice. It was not human. It was deep, as if coming from within his own mind. Why do you continue? Can't you see that this path only brings suffering? Elias shuddered. This voice was like the voice of the mysterious man by the fire. He closed his eyes, trying to concentrate. What are you looking for? What do you think you'll find at the end of this narrow path? Elias gritted his teeth. Truth. Meaning. God. The voice chuckled. And what if it's all just an illusion? What if there's nothing at the end of this path? You've given up everything: family, safety, food, water, to chase a dream. Are you sure you're not a fool? Elias shook his head. No. I believe God has a plan for me. Do you believe? You're dying in this desert. If God really loves you, why doesn't he save you now? After drinking and resting, Elias turned to the shepherd. You said I came to the right place. But what do you mean? The shepherd looked at his sheep grazing and said slowly, You know, being a shepherd is not always easy. These sheep need protection, need guidance. If I don't take care of them, they will get lost, fall into deep pits, or become prey to wild animals. Elias nodded. The shepherd continued, But the most difficult thing is not protecting them from wild animals. It is making them trust me. Elias frowned. Trust? The shepherd smiled. Yes. Sometimes I have to lead them through dangerous paths, through narrow ravines, through barren fields. Then they don't understand why I don't lead them to green pastures right away. They don't understand that I know what's best for them. Elias felt his heart pounding. The shepherd looked straight into his eyes. God is also a shepherd. He leads you through trials, through rough roads. And you may not understand why at the time. But if you trust him, you will never go astray. Elias felt these words strike straight into his heart. He had doubted, he had wondered why God had allowed him to be put through such trials. But now he understood that God had always been guiding him. The shepherd continued, Once I had a very stubborn little sheep. It always wanted to go its own way, always left the flock, always ran into dangerous places. One day, it got stuck in a thorn bush and could not get out by itself. "So what did you do?" Elias asked. "I found him, pulled him out of the thorn bush, and brought him back to the flock. But he still didn't understand why I forbade him to go alone. So I had to do something that you might find strange." "What?" the shepherd said slowly. "I gently broke one of his legs." Elias was startled. "You did that?" The shepherd nodded. "But then I bandaged his wound and carried him on my shoulders, carrying him all the way. I cared for him until he was healed. And from then on, he never left me again. He learned that I never hurt him without reason." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. He remembered all the trials he had gone through, the thirst, the temptations, the sandstorms. Had God also broken him so that he could learn to trust him? Elias looked at the shepherd and said with emotion in his voice, "I understand. Sometimes trials are not punishment. Sometimes God allows us to suffer, but only to bring us closer to him." The shepherd smiled. "Yes, Elias, and you will have many more trials. But if you remember this lesson, you will never lose your way." Elias took a deep breath. He was ready to continue. He thanked the shepherd, then turned and continued walking forward. Now he had no more doubts. He knew that he was being guided no matter how difficult the path. Elias continues on the narrow path, carrying with him the lessons he has learned along the way. From Father Raphael, he learns that not all traditions are true and that true faith lies not in form but in substance. From Maria, the young mother, he learns that pain does not mean suffering and that love can turn pain into happiness. From Lucius, the rich man, he sees that there are people who possess everything but remain empty because they do not know what is truly valuable. From Simon, the prisoner, he learns that freedom is not the absence of chains, but the freedom from ambition and fear. From the mysterious beggar, he learns the lesson of trusting in God even when the path ahead is not clear. From the shepherd, he learns that God sometimes allows people to be tested, not to punish them, but to bring them back to him. Now Elias had no more doubts. He knew he was on the right track. After months of traveling, Elias reached the foot of a towering mountain, its peak hidden in the white clouds. This was the final destination. He had heard that at the top of this mountain there was a narrow door, the door that Jesus had spoken of. No one knew exactly what the door looked like or what would happen if they passed through it. Only one thing was certain, it was not for those who wanted an easy path. Elias began to climb. The path up the mountain was more difficult than any of his previous trials. The cold wind cut into his skin, threatening to blow him off the cliff. The slopes were steep, making every step a struggle. Sharp rocks cut into his feet, making him bleed. But Elias did not stop. He was no longer afraid of pain. He was no longer afraid of lack. He was no longer afraid of getting lost. He just believed. And finally, after many days of climbing, he reached the top. In front of Elias was a stone gate. It was very narrow, only enough for one person to pass through. No one could carry luggage, wealth, or anything else. Elias approached and touched the door. At that moment, a voice rang out. "Are you ready to pass through?" Elias was startled. He turned around but saw no one. The voice did not come from outside. It came from within his own mind. Elias took a deep breath, then replied, "Yes, I am ready." "Then leave everything behind. Go through with the lightest of hearts." Elias understood. He took off his cloak, left behind his luggage, the last things he had left from the old world. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. As Elias passed through the narrow door, he felt a bright light envelop him. He no longer felt tired. No more pain. No more fear. Only absolute peace. He opened his eyes, and before him was a green field stretching to infinity, the sky bluer than any he had ever seen. A feeling of happiness flooded Elias's soul. He had found what he was looking for. Not a place, not a material reward, but a complete awakening. He understood now that the narrow door was not just a way, but a state of mind, a union with God, a complete surrender to find the true meaning of life. He had come to the place where the narrow path led, and he knew that he had found true happiness. Lightbulb, the narrow path is not the path of suffering, but the path of truth, love, and awareness. Lightbulb, the trials along the way are not punishments, but God's way of teaching us to trust in Him. Lightbulb, happiness does not lie in material things, fame, or power, but in the peace of mind that comes from living according to the truth. Lightbulb, the narrow door is not a place, but a transformation, a moment when a person lets go of everything and enters the light of God.